It is a delight to be able to worship together in the house of the Lord, and Shirant, an absolute delight to be able to see you. Thank you for those fine words of encouragement you shared with us, and finally we get to see you. But you know what? It's like you've been here right along. That's what technology does. And also good to see Mr. and Mrs. Bonaratnam, and there might be some other new people. Of course, Lim's been here now for a while, so Lim's no longer a visitor. She's part of the gang. And so good to see all of you in the house of the Lord, and to all our friends who are watching us and being a part of this service online. I'd like to begin with a story of a man who was rushing out to work in the morning, and as he was getting his bag organized and rushing out, he happened to catch a glimpse of his wife in their room, and she was looking into the mirror, and she said very softly to herself, "I wish I was 10 again." And so the man paid attention to this, and on his way to the work he was driving, and he was thinking through, what could my wife have meant when she said, "I wish I was 10 again"? And so he came to this rational conclusion, and all men think they are very rational, by the way. So he came to this rational conclusion saying, I know what this is about. Her birthday is coming up very soon, and she is wishing that she was 10 years again. And so when he got to the office, he talked to his colleagues, and he said, tell me something, what do 10-year-old girls love to do? And his lady colleagues in the office said, it's ice cream, birthday cake, Disney movies, merry-go-rounds, cotton candy and magic shows and all of that. So the man made a list of all that he would do for his wife on her upcoming birthday, because he heard this statement where she said, I wish I was 10 again. So he told her as the day arrived, he said, you're not going anywhere. I have a whole day of surprises planned for you. And true to his promise to himself, he did the birthday cake, he did the cotton candy, he did the circuses, he did the Disney movies, the Barbie dolls and the whole works. And then at the end of the day, the lady was so tired she could barely walk, because this was a hectic schedule. So as they walked into the house, the husband asked, I hope you liked your birthday surprise. And the lady says, not at all. And she said, what was this all about, from one event to the other event? And then he said, this all goes back to something I heard you say in front of the mirror, where you said, I wish I was 10 again. And she said, oh, you silly man, I meant I wish I was dress size 10 again. I'll give you a little time to let that story sink in, but if you've got that story, then you've got the crux of my message. Basically, that story is about measures that have been mixed up. And when you mix up your measurements or your measures, you know that you run into trouble. There is confusion, there is frustration, and the outcomes are terribly flawed. Whether it is in baking or in cooking, we all know that if you've got your measures all mixed up, your measurements mixed up, the outcome is terribly flawed. You might offer burnt offerings, as we say. In the realm of work, sometimes we get our calculations, we use the wrong measures, we mix up the measurements, and then the outcome is flawed. Even when it comes to travel, sometimes the outcomes are flawed because we've used the wrong measurement, or we get our measurements mixed up. And even with relationships, that's very true. We measure people the wrong way. We get our measures and measurements all mixed up. We assess people wrong, and then in the end, it is very tragic. And the same is true of our relationship with God as well. Sometimes we measure God wrong, we get our measurements of God all mixed up, and then there is confusion and there is frustration. Now today, as we continue in our series, the questions that God asks His people, we look at the questions that God asks Job. God asks Job not one question, not two, but in the passage that Shirantani read so clearly for us today, and in the rest of the chapters, we see that God asking almost 60 to 80 questions. Now you might wonder, why is this 60 to 80? Don't you have an exact number? But the manner in which these questions have been structured, sometimes one question can be broken up into 2 or 3 little questions, and so any number between 60 to 80. But the point being that God is asking Job a lot of questions. And why is God asking Job all these questions? Because as you read from the early part of the story, Job has lived life well. Job is a good man. He is a religious man. He is a helpful man. But somewhere along the lines, there is a subtle streak of self-righteousness that has crept in. And God asks these questions of Job to help him understand that he has got his measure, his measurement of God a little bit off track or off target. And God is asking Job these questions to help Job get back on track. And as a result of all the questions that God asks Job, you listen to that passage, Job chapter 42, verses 1 through 6, we clearly see Job repenting. So the story ends well, where Job recognizes, yes, he's gone off track, but he comes back and he gets back on track. So it's a great story. It's a story that ends in hope. So I want to begin by looking at the questions that God asks and looking at Job's response at the end in chapter 42. Let me ask a true or false question, or yes or no. We'll keep it to yes or no. Would you like for me to go through all 60 questions one by one in detail and walk you through? The answer is a no, but some of you are like, no, please don't even go there, because we'll be here till the corn roast next Saturday. But here's what I propose to do. I want to give you an outline as to what these questions are. So that little video that Pastor Roger played for us, that was great. Was it the Gospel Coalition or, Bible Project? Yes, they've done an amazing job. So in chapter 38, you will see God asking questions about creation. He talks about planets, he talks about stars, he talks about the waves, and he keeps asking Job, where were you when I created all of this? Did you help me, Job? Were you a part of this grand project? And Job is getting the message. In chapter 39, we see God talking about creatures or his creation. He gives examples from the animal world, from birds, from different aspects of creatures and their lifestyle. And he keeps asking Job, where were you when I did all this? Where were you when I set all these things in motion? Did you help me? And the answer to all that is a resounding no. And then when we get to chapter 40 and 41, as you saw those images of those very powerful beasts, Leviathan and Behemoth. Now, over the years, theologians have speculated as to what these might be. Are these extinct creatures? Is it the hippopotamus? Is it a giant lizard? So on and so forth. But we won't venture there today. All we can say is that these were two large creatures that Job knew about. And they were fearful. They instilled fear when you came close to them, when you looked upon them. And God is saying, Job, I created these. You are afraid of these creatures, but I created these. This is how powerful I am. And in the end, as I mentioned, Job responds. I love verse 6 of Job chapter 42, because it says that Job repented. Job turned and responded to God the manner in which God wanted him to. So what I want to do is focus not so much on the 70 or 80 questions that we have, but talk about Job's response in Job chapter 42 verses 1 through 6. So may we bring it up, please, Andrew. And this is Job's response, and I want to pull out three aspects of his response. The first one is found in verse 2. We don't have a verse 2 here on this, but in verse 2, Job acknowledges God's greatness and sovereignty. So I suppose what we are talking about is then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything and no one can stop you. Some versions say that I know that nothing can thwart your purpose. And so we are sitting here this afternoon as God's people, and God has promised us in so many different ways that He has a plan and He has a purpose for each one of our lives. But even as you're sitting here this afternoon, perhaps certain incidents have taken place. Certain calamities have come upon you, just like they did in Job's life. And you're probably thinking, are these purposes of God going to be derailed? Are these purposes of God going to be thwarted? Will it come to naught? But we have this assurance from verse 2, and that is that God's greatness and sovereignty overrules every situation. No purpose of God can be thwarted. So that to me is a personal encouragement that as we go through the challenges of life, as we go through the calamities of life, that in the midst of all of this, that nothing can thwart the purposes of God. Not only is God great, but He is also sovereign. And sovereign means that He can use every situation between the good, the bad, the ugly, and use it for His glory. And as His child, I can rest assured knowing that God's purposes for my life can never be thwarted by anybody or any situation that I face. The second insight that I want to share from Job's response is that he repented of his own limited, incomplete view of God. So as I was saying, over the years, Job had developed a streak of self-righteousness, a very subtle streak. In fact, when you go to chapter 31, we won't bring it up now, don't worry, Andrew. The whole of chapter 31, Job defends his position. And chapter 32 verse 1, the counselors go still, they go quiet, because Job was expressing the fact that he was righteous in his own sight. And this can happen to any one of us. Job failed to understand that God was blessing him because God wanted him to bless others. But somewhere along the lines, Job began to entertain the thought that he was a good man and worthy of being blessed. And so God had to change the paradigm. And that is why God asks him all these questions. Job, where were you when I did this? Where were you when I created the world? Where were you when I spoke life into existence? And all these questions caused Job to realize, yes, I had an incomplete view of God. And we see this in verse 3, where he says, this is 42, verse 1 to 6. It is I, and I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. I was talking, but I was talking about things I did not understand. And now he says, I have come to that understanding. There is a book titled, Not God Enough. And it's written by J.D. Greer. And here's what he says about our limited view of God. We are all guilty of creating a domesticated version of God, a bigger, better version of ourselves, a God who does not contradict us, and a God who can be explained by us. And on this journey, we have become over familiar with God and lost that sense of awe and reverence for God. And I thought that's a very profound statement from this book, Not God Enough. And if you think about it, sometimes we try to explain God with our logic, and we try to explain God with all the things that are happening around us. And this is what was happening to Job. He was Job-centric. He tried to explain life's happenings, his calamities from his point of view. And God was saying, Job, you need to move from your Job-centric view to the God-centric view. You need to recognize that I am at the center of the universe and I need to be at the center of your life, not Job-centric. Sir Lionel Lecou, some of us remember the name. He was a great apologist of many years ago. And he said, if God can be fully explained by the human mind, then he is no greater than the human mind that has explained it. And if you think about it, based on that statement by Sir Lionel Lecou, you will recognize that there will always be that part, that dimension or those dimensions of God that we will not fully understand. That's the mystery and the magic of our relationship with God. That God is knowable. We can get to know God more and more as we read His Word, as we spend time in prayer. We grow in our knowledge of God. We get to know Him more and more. But there will always be that side which is known as the incomprehensibility of God. And that dynamic tension will always exist until we see Him face to face one day. And Job comes into that revelation. My third insight from Job's response is found in verse 5. He acknowledged these experiences had taken him deeper. And this is that line that says, I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with mine own eyes. That's a very interesting and powerful statement. He said, all these years I knew you, but now as a result of what I have gone through, as a result of these calamities that I have gone through, I see you, I know you in a full and complete way. You know, even in our lives, first we hear sounds before we see things. Imagine in your garden, imagine in your garden, you hear the sound of something that's moving around. You don't see it. You know something is there. And then with time, as you turn around, there's some sound behind you, you turn around and you are able to see the source or the cause of that sound. And that's the image that is being used here. Where Job says, you know, all these years I had known you, but now I know you even more. Why and how? Because of these calamities that I have been through. And so it is my prayer that even as we face the challenges of life, that we would say, God, help me see more of you in this crisis. You might be going through something like what Job went through, something that you cannot explain. It could be a series of calamities that you have been experiencing. And you might be asking the why question. Why am I going through these challenges, one after the other? And we love to ask the why questions. But like Job, we can say, God, I don't understand why I'm going through all of this, but help me, Lord Jesus, to see more of you. And then like Job, we will be able to say, I knew you, but as a result of these challenges that I have faced, I now see you clearly. You have become more personal, you have become more real, and I have this great intimate relationship with you. May God bless the reflection of His Word. And I believe it's a very fitting hymn for us to sing as we close, I Stand in Awe. And this is exactly what J.D. Greer says in his book, Not God Enough. He says that we have lost that sense of awe and reverence for God. So as we sing this together, may we be reminded of the awesome God we serve.